Hey guys, and welcome to Open Table. We're so glad you're here with us today. We're going through the book of Psalms together, and I just want to encourage you, get involved in the conversation today. You're able to share your doubts and ask questions here. We want you to share open and honestly what you think and feel about God, about faith in the Bible. So again, we're so glad you're here. Let's get started. All right, guys, so we've been in the book of Psalms, and we've been looking at David and other authors interacting with God. They have deep emotion, highs and lows. We see that God is not changed or moved by their emotion, but he's constant. And so this week, we're going to look at Psalms chapter 31. How does God respond when we're in deep pain and hurt? Is he present? Is he there? But first, let's break the ice. So this week we're going through Psalm 31 and seeing how David interacts with God when he's in deep pain and distress. The reality is life will bring difficult things. Maybe you've been feeling really lonely lately, or maybe your family's having a hard time getting along. Maybe it's someone you love just passed away. How should we respond in those times of pain and struggle? Where should we go? Who should we turn to? Well, let's take a look at David and what he writes in a prayer to God. So we're going to be in 31 verse 9, where he says, "Be gracious to me, O Lord, for I am in distress. My eye is wasted from grief, my soul and my body also. For my life is spent with sorrow and my years with sighing. My strength fails because of my iniquity, and my bones waste away." It's pretty strong language there. He's saying my soul and my body are wasted in grief. My life is spent in sorrow. He's even going to go on in verse 12 to say, I have been forgotten like one who is dead. So right away, David is showing us that it's okay to not be okay. Remember, David is described in the Bible as being a man after God's own heart. David has a relationship with God where he can tell God exactly where he's at. I think this is a struggle for us when we feel pain. We want to hide, we want to run away. But here we see David is pouring his heart out to God. He shows us that we can be honest with God about where we are in our pain and our struggle. So let's talk about a time when you felt like David and what that was like. So hopefully as you shared at your tables, you see that we've all felt alone and far from God at one point or another. We all have a tendency to run from God instead of to him, if we're really honest. We see this right from the beginning with Adam and Eve. In Genesis 3, right after the fall takes place, Adam and Eve hide in the garden. They think they can hide from the creator of the universe. And because of that, we all have a tendency to hide. We think God's absent and that he's too busy to care about our hurt or our pain. But throughout Psalms, we keep talking about the steadfast love of God. We see it as a theme throughout the writing. A few weeks ago, we talked about how God's track record outweighs our emotion, that he's proved himself time and time again. And David knows this, and he responds out of that deep trust and hope that he has in God. In Psalm 31, David continues in verses 14 and 15. He says, "But I trust in you, O Lord. I say, you are my God. My times are in your hand. Rescue me from the hand of my enemies and from my persecutors." David is crying out to God, knowing that God is faithful. Again, this goes back to the relationship that David has with God. Because he has a relationship, he's seen God prove himself faithful in his life over and over again. This isn't him pretending everything is fine. He's able to be honest with God because God has proven his track record. This brings us to the main thought for this week. Trust becomes real in the struggle. Because of the hard things we go through in this life, we can really trust in God. It's easy to trust God is good when our life goes well, when things seem fine and everything seems okay. But our faith and our trust can grow in the pain and the struggle of this life. So that brings us to question 2. Have you ever struggled to believe God was good? So for me, growing up, I always went to private school. I did life with people who thought like me, talked like me, believed like me. It was no big deal to talk about Jesus and faith, but I remember in 8th grade, I transferred into public school. And that year was like the whole bottom fell out. I didn't live like these people did. I didn't know what to do with all of this new chaos around me. And kids were doing drugs, they were partying on the weekend, they were using bad words, and I had to make a choice. It was the first time in my life that I had to choose faith for myself, for my own. And the struggle forced me to decide if I was gonna believe God was good and for me, or if I was gonna live like everybody else I saw around me. The book of James actually talks about this in James 1 verse 2, where it says, "Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds. For you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing." For me, I had to go through that year to realize that my faith in God was something I could stand on. It had been just something we talked about, but all of a sudden it was something real, like I could count on God through the struggle of life. Do we have this kind of response to suffering in our own lives? That God is at work, that He's producing a steadfastness in us, that we can trust Him in the midst of great pain and sorrow? Let's take some time to talk about that now. So through reading Psalm 31, we see that David struggles and responds to God. We see that our trust in God can build through the struggle of life. God's steadfast love becomes something that we don't just talk about, but we actually experience. We don't have to hide from God or pretend everything's okay. We can be honest about right where we're at. Well, thanks for coming today, guys. We're so glad you're at Open Table. If you'd like to continue the conversation, grab a leader after. We'll see you next week.